The Curse of Writing by Atsushi Nakajima. Does such a thing as a spirit of writing truly exist? The Assyrians knew innumerable spirits. Lilu, who prowled through the darkness at night, his female counterpart Lilitu, Namtar, who scattered pestilence, Itimu, the spirit of the dead, Labasu the abductor, countless evil spirits filled the skies of Assyria. Yet no one had ever heard of a spirit of writing. At that time, around the 20th year of the reign of the great king Ashurbanipal, a curious rumor circulated through the court at Nineveh. Every night, it was said, strange whispering voices could be heard in the darkness of the library. The revolt of the king's elder brother, Shamash-shumukin, had only just been put down with the fall of Babylon, so the court investigated whether another band of malcontents might be plotting some conspiracy. Nothing of the kind could be found. The voices had to belong to spirits of some sort. Some said they were the ghosts of the Babylonian prisoners recently executed before the king, but everyone could see that this was impossible. More than 1,000 Babylonian captives had been put to death after their tongues were torn out, and the collected tongues had made a little mound, a fact known to all. Tongueless ghosts could hardly speak. After astrology and divination by sheep's liver had been tried in vain, there remained no conclusion but that the books, or perhaps the written characters themselves, were talking. Yet no one had the least idea what sort of being a spirit of writing, if such a thing existed, might be. The great king Ashurbanipal therefore summoned Nabu-ahayariba, an old scholar with enormous eyes and tightly curled hair, and commanded him to investigate this unknown spirit. From that day on, Dr. Nabu-ahayariba went daily to the library in question, a library destined to be buried underground 200 years later, and then accidentally excavated after another 2,300 years. There he immersed himself in study, straining his eyes over its countless books. Unlike Egypt, Mesopotamia produced no papyrus. Its people carved complex wedge-shaped signs into tablets of clay with a hard stylus. Books were tiles, and a library resembled a pottery warehouse. Every day, towering heaps of these tiles rose upon the old scholar's table, whose legs were made from the actual paws of lions, claws and all. He searched that weighty store of ancient knowledge for some doctrine concerning the spirits of writing, but in vain. Nothing was recorded beyond the fact that writing belonged to the god Nabu of Borsippa. Whether writing possessed a spirit was a question he would have to settle for himself. He left the books aside, placed a single written character before him, and spent the entire day staring fixedly at it. Diviners claimed to perceive every event by gazing fixedly at a sheep's liver. Following their example, he sought truth through steady contemplation. Then something strange happened. As he stared at the character for a long while, it gradually came apart before his eyes, until he could see nothing but meaningless intersecting strokes. He could no longer understand how a mere collection of lines could possess that particular sound and that particular meaning. Nabu-ahayariba, venerable scholar that he was, encountered this astonishing fact for the first time in his life. What he had overlooked as self-evident for 70 years was neither self-evident nor inevitable. It was as though scales had fallen from his eyes. What was it that gave a collection of disconnected strokes a fixed sound and a fixed meaning? The moment he arrived at this question, the old scholar acknowledged without hesitation that spirits of writing existed. Hands, legs, head, nails, belly, and all the other parts are not a human being unless a soul governs them. In the same way, how could a mere collection of lines possess sound and meaning unless a single spirit governed them? Beginning with this discovery, he gradually learned, little by little, the previously unknown nature of the spirits of writing. Their number was as great as the number of things upon the earth. They bore young and multiplied like field mice. Nabu-ahayariba walked all over Nineveh, catching hold of people who had recently learned to read and patiently questioning them one by one. Had they noticed any change in themselves since the days before they knew writing? In this way he hoped to determine how the spirits of writing acted upon human beings. The result was a peculiar body of statistics. An overwhelming number reported that after learning to read they had suddenly become worse at catching lice, that dust entered their eyes more often, that they could no longer see the eagles they had once seen clearly in the sky, or that the sky itself no longer looked so blue. In a new clay memorandum Nabuahayariba inscribed, "The spirits of writing devour the human eye, even as a maggot bores through the hard shell of a walnut and artfully consumes the meat within." There were also considerable numbers who said that since learning their letters they had begun to cough, had been troubled by sneezing, suffered frequent hiccups, or developed diarrhea. The spirits of writing appear also to attack the human nose, throat, belly, and other parts, the old scholar recorded. Some had suddenly begun to lose their hair after learning to read. Others had developed weak legs, trembling limbs, or jaws that dislocated easily. In the end, however, Nabuahayariba was forced to write. The harm wrought by writing reaches its fullest extent when it invades the human brain and paralyzes the mind. Compared with the time before they had learned their letters, craftsmen had lost skill in their hands, warriors had grown timid, and hunters missed their lions more often. The statistics made this perfectly clear. One man complained that since becoming familiar with writing, he no longer found any pleasure at all in embracing a woman. Admittedly, the complainant was over 70, so writing might not have been to blame. Nabuahayariba began to reflect. The Egyptians regarded a thing's shadow as part of its soul. Might not writing be something like such a shadow? Was not the written character for lion the shadow of a real lion? Once a hunter had learned the character for lion, perhaps he aimed at the lion's shadow in place of the real beast, and once a man had learned the character for woman, perhaps he embraced a woman's shadow in place of the woman herself. Long ago, before writing existed, before the flood of Pir-napishtim, joy and wisdom entered human beings directly. Now we know only the shadows of joy and wisdom, draped in the thin veil of writing. People's memories have deteriorated in recent times. This too is a trick played by the spirits of writing. People can no longer remember anything unless they write it down. When clothes came into use, human skin grew weak and ugly. When vehicles were invented, human legs grew weak and ugly. And as writing spread, people's minds ceased to work. Nabuahayariba knew an old man who was mad about books. This man was even more learned than the learned Nabuahayariba himself. He read not only Sumerian and Aramaic with ease, but even the Egyptian script recorded on papyrus and parchment. Of everything in ancient times that had ever been put into writing, there was nothing he did not know. He knew what the weather had been on a certain day of a certain month in a certain year of the reign of King Tukulti-Ninurta. Yet he failed to notice whether today's sky was clear or overcast. He knew by heart the words with which the maiden Sabatir had comforted Gilgamesh. Yet he did not know what to say to comfort a neighbor who had lost his son. He even knew what kinds of clothing Samaramat, queen of King Adat-nirari, had preferred. Yet he remained entirely unaware of the clothes he himself was wearing at that moment. How passionately he loved writing and books. Reading, memorizing, and caressing them were not enough. So great was his love that he had once bitten an ancient clay tablet bearing the oldest version of the Epic of Gilgamesh into pieces, dissolved it in water, and drunk it. The spirits of writing had devoured his eyes without mercy, leaving him terribly nearsighted. From reading with his face pressed so close to his books, the tip of his aquiline nose had rubbed against the clay tablets until a hard callus formed there. The spirits had eaten into his spine as well, and he was so hunched that his chin nearly touched his navel. He probably did not know that he was a hunchback. He could, however, write the word hunchback in the scripts of 5 different nations. Dr. Nabuahayariba ranked this man first among the victims of the spirits of writing. Yet despite the misery of his outward appearance, the old man always seemed genuinely, indeed, enviably, happy. This was puzzling, if anything was, but Nabuahayariba attributed even that happiness to the spirit's treacherous magic, like a love potion. It happened that the great king Ashurbanipal fell ill. His court physician, Orodnana, judged the sickness grave. He borrowed the great king's garments, put them on, and disguised himself as the ruler of Assyria. By doing so, he intended to deceive the eyes of Ereshkigal, deity of death, and transfer the illness from the king to himself. Some of the younger men regarded this time-honored practice of physicians with distrust. It was plainly irrational, they said. Surely a deity such as Ereshkigal could never be deceived by so childish a trick. The eminent Nabu Aheriba made a sour face when he heard them. There was something peculiar in the young men's desire to make everything fit together logically. It was like a man filthy from head to foot who took one spot, the tip of a toenail, say, and decorated it with extravagant beauty. They did not understand humanity's place within the cloud of mystery. The old scholar considered shallow rationalism a kind of disease, and he had no doubt that the spirits of writing had spread it. One day a young historian, or perhaps a keeper of the court records, named Ishtinabu came to visit the old scholar and asked, "What is history?" When he saw Nabu Aheriba's astonished expression, the young historian explained. There were many accounts of the recent death of Shamash-Shumukin, king of Babylon. It was certain that he had cast himself into the flames. But some said that during his final month, driven by despair, he had lived in unspeakable debauchery, while others said that every day he had purified himself and done nothing but pray to the god Shamash. One account held that he entered the fire with his chief queen alone, another, that he first threw hundreds of maidservants and concubines into the burning pyre and only then entered it himself. Since he had quite literally gone up in smoke, no one had the least idea which account was true. Before long the great king would surely choose one of them and command Ishtinabu to record it. This was only one example, the young man said, but was this really what history ought to be?
Seeing the wise old scholar wisely preserve his silence, the young historian recast his question. Does history mean the things that once happened? Or does it mean the writing on clay tablets?
There was something in this question that confused a lion hunt with a bas-relief of a lion hunt. The scholar sensed the confusion but could not put it clearly into words, so he answered, "History consists of things that happened in the past and were also recorded upon clay tablets. Are those not the same thing?"
What about omissions? The historian asked.
Omissions? Don't be absurd. What was not written never happened. A seed that never sprouts was, in the end, never there from the beginning. History is this clay tablet.
Looking forlorn, the young historian gazed at the tile the scholar had indicated. It was one tablet from the account of King Sargon's campaign against Chaldea, written by Nabusharim-Shunu, the greatest historian in the land. A pomegranate seed that the scholar had spat out while talking clung disgustingly to its surface.
Ishtinabu, you plainly know nothing yet of the terrible power of the spirits of writing, servants of Nabu, the god of wisdom at Borsippa. Once those spirits seize upon an event and reveal it in their own form, that event acquires immortal life. Conversely, whatever has not been touched by the powerful hand of the spirits of writing must lose its very existence. Why are there no stars that have not been entered in the ancient tablets of Anu and Enlil? Because they were not placed there as written characters. The god's wrath falls when the great star Marduk, Jupiter, trespasses upon the domain of the shepherd of heaven, Orion, and calamity befalls the people of Huma when an eclipse appears upon the upper rim of the moon, only because these things are recorded in ancient books. The ancient Sumerians did not know the animal called the horse because they possessed no written character for horse. No power is more terrible than the power of these spirits. You are gravely mistaken if you imagine that you and I use writing to set things down. We are the servants driven to labor by the spirits of writing. Yet the harm those spirits bring is terrible as well. I am investigating it now. The reason you have begun to doubt the writing in which history is recorded is simply that you have grown too intimate with writing and been poisoned by its spirits.
The young historian went away with a strange expression. For a while longer, the old scholar grieved that the poison of the spirits of writing was threatening even that promising young man. There was no contradiction in becoming so intimate with writing that one began to doubt it. Only the other day, yielding to his naturally enormous appetite, the scholar had eaten nearly an entire roasted sheep. For some time afterward, he had been unable to bear even the sight of a living sheep's face, Some while after the young historian departed, Nobuo Heiariba suddenly pressed a hand to his thinning curly hair and sank into thought. Had he not, that very day, praised the power of the spirits of writing to the young man? Damn it, he muttered with a click of his tongue. Even I have been bewitched by them. In truth, the spirits of writing had long since afflicted the old scholar with a dreadful disease. It had begun when, in order to confirm their existence, he spent days staring fixedly at a single written character. As already related, the character that ought to have possessed a definite sound and meaning abruptly disintegrated into a mere collection of straight lines. Ever since then, the same phenomenon had begun to occur with everything, not only writing. If he stared at a house, it transformed within his eyes and mind into a meaningless collection of timber, stone, brick, and plaster. He could no longer understand why such a thing had to be a place for human beings to live. The same was true when he looked at a human body. It was analyzed into separate parts of meaningless and grotesque shapes, and he could not begin to comprehend how a thing so formed could pass for a human being. Nor was the disease confined to visible objects. All the ordinary activities and customs of human beings lost their former meaning beneath this same strange mania for analysis. Every foundation of human life now appeared doubtful. Dr. Nobuo Heiariba felt himself approaching madness. If he continued his investigation of the spirits of writing, he thought, they would eventually take his life. Frightened, he hastily compiled his report and presented it to the great king Ashurbanipal. Naturally, he added a number of political observations. Assyria, a nation built on war, had now been wholly eaten away by invisible spirits of writing, although almost no one realized it. Unless the blind worship of writing was abandoned at once, regret would come too late, and so on. The spirits of writing could hardly leave their slanderer unpunished. Nobuo Heiariba's report gravely displeased the great king. This was only natural in a ruler who fervently revered the god Nabu and ranked among the foremost men of culture of his age. The old scholar was placed under house arrest that very day. Had Nobuo Heiariba not been Ashurbanipal's tutor since the king's childhood, he would probably have been flayed alive. Stunned by this unexpected royal displeasure, the scholar understood at once that it was the revenge of the treacherous spirits of writing. But that was not all. Several days later, a great earthquake struck the region of Nineveh and Arbela. At the time, the scholar happened to be in his private library. His house was old, the walls collapsed and the shelves toppled. A vast quantity of books, hundreds of heavy clay tablets, came crashing down upon the slanderer amid the written characters' terrible curses, and he met a gruesome death beneath them.
The Japanese Mystery Library. Classic mysteries from Japan in English. Subscribe to hear the next story.